Welcome back. We are fortunate today to be joined by Ms. Sue Gordon, the current director at CACI International. Ms. Gordon was the 5th Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence from August 2017 to August 2019. As PDD-NI, Ms. Gordon was a key advisor to the President and National Security Council and led the 17-member intelligence community. With more than 3 decades of experience in the IC, Ms. Gordon has served in a variety of leadership roles, spanning numerous intelligence organizations and disciplines. Prior to the DNI, Ms. Gordon served as the Deputy Director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency from 2015 to 2017, helping the Director lead the agency and manage the national system of geospatial intelligence. Before joining the NGA, she served for 27 years at the Central Intelligence Agency, rising to senior executive positions in each of the agency's 4 directorates: operations, analysis, science and technology, and support. In 1998, she designed and drove the formation of In-Q-Tel, a private nonprofit company whose primary purpose is to deliver innovative technology solutions for the agency and the IC. She is the recipient of numerous government and industry awards, including the Distinguished Intelligence Medal and the Distinguished Presidential Rank Award. Sue earned a Bachelor of Science from Duke University. A trusted authority on strategy, innovation, and leadership, Ms. Gordon is currently a consultant on global risk, technology, cyber and space issues, and a member of the board of Palace Advisors, a Washington, D.C. based consultancy. I'll turn it over to you now, Ms. Gordon.
Well, great. Thank you for having me, Dr. Oakley, and thanks to the special ops community, especially over the last 20 years as you carried a disproportionate national security load. I'm going to brazenly state that the intelligence community loves being your partners because you are the great doers of our government, and outcome is what gives intelligence purpose. And on just a deeply personal note, at this almost 20th anniversary of 2011, and at the moment of our departure from Afghanistan, to all the women and men who are in our audience who devoted themselves to our work there, historians will talk about this time and a whole bunch of things. But what is true and what you have to know is that you made a difference. You made things better, and you did that every day. We won't know who you gave hope, who you gave opening, who you gave opportunity, who you showed the way, but you made a difference, and thank you. Listen, we're at one of those moments or inflection points where everything hangs in the balance, where our success over past threats is giving way to new strategic uncertainty, where we just don't know how things will unfold. And today what I thought I'd do is to talk with you, not to you, so don't expect me to be fancy or polished. I'm going to try not to pull any punches, in part because I love us so much that I think we can be honest with each other. But there are some realities that need to be heard, need to be addressed, and are the key to our future success. I am confident that we collectively will solve this moment, as we have so many others. And I can't believe what a good lineup of speakers you have had today and you will have tomorrow that will certainly show the way. And I am both awed and nervous to be part of this selection of patriots and leaders. Nonetheless, onward. I said this before, this is a really different world. I think we say this a lot, but this is as different as I've ever seen. And I can say that because I'm old. The most important thing that I want you all to have in your head is that we aren't going to be able to simply draft off the work of our predecessors. We are going to have to create anew, and that requires several things. One, you have to see really clearly the moment. You have to establish a vision of what you need to be, and then you have to imagine what you have to do to achieve that vision. And just seeing the vision is not the same as delivering against it. They are very different things, but we have to be all those. See clearly, establish a vision, and then be able to translate that into some specific actions that will get us to the future. To me, what makes this world so different is that it's a world of ubiquitous technology. And what I mean by that is that everyone has access to everything. Technology itself isn't the strategic advantage that it once was. And what the outcome of this is that speed to use is the key to advantage. In other words, the person that can put technology to use faster is the one that is going to win. And that has a couple realities. Number one, it favors people without an installed base. So new actors to the fray are going to have an advantage because they can develop capability against a less entrenched background. And the other thing is they have a clearer focus of the moment rather than carrying the past with them. So ubiquitous technology makes speed to use the coin of the realm rather than just access to the technology itself. It's a world of near perfect digital connectedness from an adversarial and competitive perspective that gives them reach and ability to affect national interests without the huge cost of physical distance and physical presence. And we see this in cyber right now. We have adversaries who are affecting their national interests digitally at almost no cost. And because it's digital and because our foundation is physical, they're able to cross boundaries that we erected in a physical world that are no longer impeding our adversaries from crossing those. And cyber is just a great example. Two great cases are the cyber theft that's going on in our private sector. And why doesn't the federal government stop this? Well, because in America and in Western liberal democracies, we typically don't want the government to go trooping into private companies. And the second is election security. Why don't we better help the state localities? And again, because the federal government is not in charge of what happens at state and localities. So this notion of dealing with a digitally connected world where adversaries can go wherever they want and up to including places that we constructed as real barriers. This is a world's third of data abundance. It should be boon, especially to intelligence officers, more dots. But it can be bane if you don't have the wherewithal to use the data creatively and use all the data to find powers rather than just looking for individual things. And you can get confused between noise and signal if you aren't able to use all of it and then be able to understand what you're seeing. Because of, in part, the digital connectedness, this is a world dominated by economic versus military and political considerations that are now increasingly dominant. Over most of my history, national security meant political military security. Over the last years, it is economic factors that are changing the nature of threat and of partnership. And it means that how we engage with our allies and partners is more situational than absolute. And you only have to look at issues like how do you have the UK, even considering the possibility of going against the US request to not use Huawei. That would have never happened in the past, but they have real economic considerations about how they build their telecommunications network. And so this notion of economic factors being dominant is different, especially when you think about how you do intelligence support to it. And then the last thing that's different is and this is a policy choice that we're seeing unfold every day, we have reduced global presence in the difficult environments. And there will be a whole different conversation about how long you should stay, whether you should stay, about committing to wars and do that. But I'll tell you from straight up intelligence perspective, it is helped by presence, especially in the more remote, more tribal cultures where they aren't keeping their data in server rooms. And how do you go get that? So it is a really different world than the ones we've had before. Now, COVID has put this in great relief. There's a great TED Talk by a British organizational theorist. It's probably about 5 to 7 years old now. The guy name's Eddie Obing, and he has, if you were to Google after midnight, his TED Talk basically says that we all went to sleep one night, and sometime after midnight, the world changed. And when we woke up in the morning, nothing that we had been doing worked anymore. And it looked the same, but we weren't getting the effect. I think this has been in play. When COVID happened, it revealed to us that so much had changed, and the capabilities and institutions that we had put in place against the more physical world, the less connected world, were not working in the same way. Just some of the things we saw is we didn't have the foresight we needed about what the truth was on the ground. We didn't have the data we needed. We didn't have the partnerships we needed. We weren't as linked between public and private, between state and local and federal. We didn't have the governance we needed. Who was in charge? Who set the rules? Who could keep us safe? And we saw the weakness of individual efficiency-based choice that are typically the consequence of abundance. And it showed in the weakness of our supply chain. In other words, we as a collective had made a whole bunch of assumptions about what we could have available to us because we assumed that the world was a relatively peaceful, relatively abundant place. And so you have us all playing a massive game of commons, and then bam, the world hits and it's a different rule. So it's not just that COVID in itself was problematic, but it kind of showed us in physical form how the world we were operating in had changed. And to me, I take away some things that are now clear that need to change about our approach to national security, both as a consequence of the changed world and what COVID revealed to us. Number one is, I think the definition of national security needs to change a bit. When I was part of the Trump administration, and former President Trump was a disproportionately economically oriented president. I mean, that's just how he saw the world. We, the intelligence community, disproportionately supported the National Security Council, but his interests were disproportionately with the National Economic Council, and those two things didn't meet up as well. So the definition of national security and national security support, I think, has to change with our new realities of economy and climate and pandemics and migration need to change. And for the intelligence community proper, I think one of the questions they're going to wrestle with is, okay, if those are national security challenges, what are our roles? What do we have to uniquely add? And what if it isn't secret information that we're going to add, but rather just the craft of how you have objective views of what is? And so I think the definition of national security is going to need to change a bit. Another thing that changes is the threat surface and the responsibility for national security. And what I mean by that is in 2021, the threat surface, certainly in America, is disproportionately not in governmental control. It's in the private sector, and it's with our citizens as evidenced through influence. And so how is the government, how's the federal government going to provide insight so that those threats can be managed? Because along with the threat surface being different, the responsibility for decision-making is not just with government officials. Citizens are making decisions about our security with the information they believe and share. Companies are making decisions about national security with what products they offer and with whom they partner and how well they protect themselves. And so it's not just that national security is now not just political military, it is now not just governmentally responsible. In the withdrawal from Afghanistan, one of the words that comes out is we're going to use over the horizon operations. Oh, wow, that is different, right? To be able to have the insight and perspective you need to be able to understand what's going on over the horizon, to influence over the horizon and be effective over the horizon, that's going to be really a catalyst for the development of new capabilities. We're going to have to really expand global information sharing and partnerships. I feel good about this because I think one of the great lessons and determinants of our relative success against terrorism was that we developed some really remarkable information sharing capabilities, and we learned how to share not just with our closest, most trusted partners, but those partners who situationally were invested in the same imperatives that we have. We're going to have to continue that pressure to be able to establish partnerships and share information, but we can't always wait for there to be a crisis in order to share information, because some of the information sharing will be necessary to avert crisis. And I think the last aspect of national security that we're going to have to address, and I know that there are a lot of talks both earlier today and I think there will be tomorrow, is we're going to have to commit to digital and data superiority. In 2021, all the threats and opportunities are going to and through information. Even if it's a weapon system, it's still an information-based weapon system. And so we cannot casually be pondering how much we trust these technologies. We are going to have, the national security community is going to have to be expert at the use of them. And there's a whole separate discussion to have about whether we're fast followers or whether we are the ones who are creating new. I will tell you, we must be expert at use of data and all the things that go with that, the assurance of trust and truth that are foundational to free and open societies. But if I feel anything at this moment that we are being way too slow about, it is just saying, it's not whether, it's not how, it's not if. We must commit the resources to be superior at the use of data for advantage. Now, I've set you up to say that this is a pretty daunting moment, and it is. From my perspective, we're in epic 3.5 of intelligence in terms of what intelligence we need. The first was the call, and I'm going to tell you this because it feels, I've just said this is different. It is. I am not concerned about our ability to find a new way forward, because we've actually done this a couple times in the past. So the Cold War, if you're anywhere close to my age, you remember at the inception, in the 1930s and early 40s, the Soviets were just eating our lunch and penetrating our nuclear weapon programs because we're an open society, and their human capabilities were delivered much more insight than our human capabilities were able to, because we just didn't have the opportunity of operating in open societies in the way they did. From that need, you see the growth of incredible technical capabilities, overhead assets that are able to get at the informations that government held. And we established the partners of how you share that data with warfighters and policymakers and allies. And that's really carried us from 1947 to 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Union, is really relying on those technical advances to be able to go places no one else could, to go beyond the horizon, to know the truth and get the information that governments held. With the fall of the Soviet Union, it's a really interesting things that happened. We basically can use the same capabilities, but now we're trying to use them against the rest of the world, as though just because weapons and missile technology had proliferated, the same collectors who could find fact of those capabilities was enough. You now see the re-rise of human against it, because you have to know intent. And if this were a conversation on intelligence failures, we talk more about how those two things play. But fall of the Soviet Union, you see the rise of the proliferation, but it's mostly our Cold War capabilities that we're still using just against a worldwide set of governments. Although you can see that our limitations in terms of understanding of intention and culture come into play in terms of how successful or less successful we were. The war on terror was a break shift that I think we have right now, and that is, all of a sudden, the information wasn't being held by governments, it was held by individuals. And the people with whom we needed to share were not just warfighters and policymakers, but all the way down to state and local, because they were going to be affected by the outcome, and also non-traditional partners. And so to me, what the war on terror inspires from an intelligence perspective is really the rise of capabilities that allow you to get at communications, at individuals' communications, and the development of entirely new sharing capabilities against it. So that was a big change for the from the Cold War capabilities. And now we're into this digital world, in a world of great power competition, where, as I say, all the threats and opportunities go through information. One of the challenges that we have as a community is that we are still we are dragging the capabilities and the responsibilities of our past with us. So we have Cold War capabilities and responsibilities. We have war on terror capabilities and responsibilities. And now we're trying to do new national security threats, focus on great power, focus on China, with the portion of our budgets and our capabilities that are left over, as though all those things still must be accomplished. And I am trying to make this big jump shift with a fraction of the resources that we have available to us. And I think that point about how do you commit to new national security issues, don't just try to do them as we did post-Cold War with the proliferating world of applying them with the same mindset, and in fact develop entirely new capabilities as we did with the war on terror. So I think this is a really interesting moment if you think about it in terms of the arc of both threats and intelligence needs. From a threat perspective, this is a really interesting time. I actually think the withdrawal from Afghanistan puts some things in tactical relief that we might not have been focusing on as much. I think this is a time that actually you could see some regional adventurism from those who might sense an opening with all the other priorities that the US has right now in terms of economic issues, rebuilding infrastructure, societal unrest, climate. They might, and then us withdrawing from our physical presence globally. I think you could see some regional adventurism, whether that's the Taiwan Straits or whether that's Ukraine, Crimea, or whether that's Iran and Ukraine, Iran and North Korea, as you already see them talking about spinning back up their programs. I think we have to be ready for that. I think cyber is, for as dominant as it is, we have not yet seen the kind of effect that it could have. Although I will argue that the positioning that we're seeing, whether that's from ransomware that is having huge economic impact and could turn off services, as we saw with the Colonial Pipeline and JBS supply chain, to infrastructure attacks. We know our adversaries and competitors are in our critical infrastructure. They haven't used it because no one really knows what the red line is, but it doesn't mean it's not sitting there. And cyber, from an influence perspective, we're still trying to wrap our heads around what that means, how we counter it, and how we go forward. And just when I've talked about cyber, that has kind of gone from being a niche specialty to a commodity, you see space coming in. We're going to have a lot of the same space issues that we have with cyber, even though we're a little bit different. So many actors in space, everything from those who would deny service in terms of competition, or those who would actually deny service with assault. I think space is another area like cyber that poses a threat if we aren't clear what our policy is going to be. And then in terms of tactical threats, I think fiscal pressures and decision-making and speed are always there. Strategic threats, I think I'd agree with everyone to say the most pressing strategic threat we face is from China, in part of their wherewithal, in part of the advances they've made over the past 10 years to be globally expansionist, in part because of their stated intent. If you haven't paid attention to Xi's talk in front of the CCP, you're not really embracing exactly how they see it. So China is certainly a strategic threat. And I will say, from an intelligence perspective, if we view China as we did the Soviet Union and think that those kinds of expertise will be the same ones we need for the threat that China poses, we will miss how different it is in terms of its intention to pursue its doctrine to its conclusion. It doesn't mean that Russia's not a threat. They are one of the most capable services. They do integrated operations as well as anybody. So, and they're increasingly brazen. So their not only absolute abilities, but their willingness to do things that you would presume would cross a line, and the resultant inability of ours to really have an effective deterrence or counter for some of the things they're doing, I think makes Russia worrisome. I don't think strategically they're quite the same, but they're right in the same word. We're going to have the conversation about counterterrorism. There is nothing about terrorism that is going to not be in vogue. And for all of my colleagues who have participated in this community, they will tell you exactly the activities that are going on that are worrisome, that are not just presaging anew what we experienced in the past, but could usher in an entirely new era. And so we have to pay attention to that. I worry about WMD every day because we just don't talk about it. And you talk about something as much, but you talk about something that could have real effect. We have 2 more countries that, even though they may not have it completely, they certainly have the capabilities that can become nuclear weapons. But they are not the kind of regime that imposes the same controls. And so you could come into a new time of proliferation, not just threat. So WMD is something worth watching. And then I mentioned climates and pandemics and migration and economic and social unrest and information disorder. And if I were Dorothy, I would put an oh my at the end of all those. And then I think I would have to say that a strategic threat for us is, are we going to have the partnerships and the coalition that we will need when something happens? Because regional issues will become global. None of them can be solved alone. And will we be able to gather the coalitions that we have needed in the past? Will we have the trust that we need? So pretty, if we thought that we could just kick back and relax, that's just not the case. I think these are as complex and as knotty, K-N-O-T-T-Y, a set of threats as I've ever seen. And the intersection with the private sector and our citizens and the government, it makes it really interesting because the mechanisms are not as well established as they might be. I remember going back to my COVID analogy, I remember listening to the daily COVID briefings by the former President Trump. And here was my reaction to it. Oh my gosh, we need government. And oh my gosh, government's not nearly good enough. And oh my gosh, the private sector has so much to offer. And oh my gosh, the private sector just doesn't have the wherewithal to become systemically scalable to handle this kind of national threat. So I think what's interesting about this set of threats is they are regional, they are global, they are capability based, and they are economically impactful, and almost everything will change about it. If I look at the state of the national security community, this is where I'm going to be less gentle, but it's going to be okay because I can't quite forget that I'm part of it. So when I offer criticism, I want you to know that I feel that. And I say that because it isn't unkind for us to admit where we need to strengthen. So I think from the state of the national security community, we're at a moment where we have new leadership in place. I love that it's a set of experienced hands that seem to be on the same page. I will say that they are still not particularly technical. And this is a technical world. And why that matters is because some of the decisions that you need to make about the things you need to do will have a technical component. And if you aren't technically conversant, it will look like too much risk or something you can't count on. So I think that's a challenge for us as new leadership, but this is a technical world. And so how do we communicate risk and opportunity when our leadership is not as conversant in technology as some of the people that are bringing solutions to them. From an observable perspective, I think we're a little flummoxed by the moment. And to me, we haven't really embraced the difference in the world to the point that we're saying, yeah, I got to be different. Frank Kendall has given some really compelling speeches where he clearly sees the kinds of things the Air Force needs to do. But I think that's the really crux of where we need to be is what are we going to do? You know, in moments of crisis, totalitarian regimes look like they have their act together because they can direct a whole of country response. It can be really attractive to hope for someone to just tell you what to do. But in fact, what has to happen is this moment as we come together and figure out what our national interests are and how we need to pursue those and make some hard decisions. So I think we're a little flummoxed by the moment. And remember that all those people who are holding on to things of the past is because there's a customer who still is asking for the products and services that they've offered. So this is not a trivial endeavor, and yet it's one that we have to address. I think the new priorities that I've talked about have yet to be resolved. Who has responsibility for that? Does the national security community have responsibility for climate or just being prepared for climate change? What would it really have to offer? What craft would it have to develop? So I'm not sure the new priorities have been resolved within our national security apparatus. You could say it in intelligence. I think we're still wrestling with the whole issue of economic intelligence and what's legitimate, what are legitimate boundaries to cross and what are not. I mentioned earlier that I think one of the real challenges of this moment is you have to have a special kind of leader that is both visionary and practical, and you have to have those people at the right level. One of the challenges we have is twofold. This 20-year war on terror took a lot of our focus, and it was the time that everyone else was kind of, in the private sector, was being awakened to the digital world and changing their processes. We wake up after that and we realize that not only do we have a lot more missions to pursue, and so we have to suck up people into leadership positions to be able to address all the missions we have, but we also have institutions that have not modernized as they need to. So this is a really interesting challenge of kind of integrated leadership at the right level who can make the decisions to make change. I would say our big historic programs are not a given, and that's true within the Department of Defense, that's true within the intelligence community. Something's got to give to make way for doing things new. The only thing I'd offer is if those big programs were community programs, in a time of crisis, agencies and departments and services like to kind of pull back to protect their own interests. That is not the right solution. What you need to find is new capabilities together, not simply saying we don't need to do that anymore so we can each try and solve the future by ourselves. I think we are still more agency and organization centric than we are community centric. And I will just say, that will not be the way we will get through this. You need to think end to end. How are you going to deliver the outcome you want, not just what is the thing that you're going to have? I think our commitment to humanitarian crisis as a nation will be an interesting disturbance in the force. We say we are committed to humanitarian causes, but we just walked away from a massive humanitarian crisis. And so how we're going to resolve that as a nation will be interesting in terms of the demand it places on intelligence and the effect it has on the security community. And then I'll get to this. The priorities in the crafting of intelligence need at best a retuning and at worst a revamping. Listen, I think that good intelligence can be the hero of any story, but how you do intelligence in this world is different from how you did it in 1947. And my challenge to every leader out there who's trying to figure out how you get from here to there, I will offer you two things. Number one, you can't get to the future from the present, and you certainly can't get there without giving up some sort of fixed point. And do a thought exercise that say, imagine if 1947 hadn't happened. We didn't think about needing an intelligence community then, but instead we thought about it today. Would you build it the same way? Would you go after the same information? Would we use talent the same way? Would you have different partnerships? And then you'll be on your way to thinking how we as a security community meet this moment. There are a lot of things that intelligence writ large is going to have to wrestle with going forward. New adversarial doctrine capabilities and operations are popping up all over. One of the things that is so interesting about a digitally connected world is that it has compressed the time to acquisition of knowledge remarkably. In other words, the world's knowledge is available to even the most closed off of nation states and individuals. And so their ability to develop a useful capability faster. The Soviet production model, which I'm a child of, is still kind of in our heads when we think about when we project the capabilities will be online. So how adversaries are going to use the capabilities that they have and what is the doctrine that's going to drive it is going to have to be assessed anew. Now, the great news is that not only is human great at intent, but I will tell you with enough data, you can infer intent. So I think that some of the ability to work with data will give us some advantage about that, but we're going to need to pursue it. To my DoD colleagues, you guys have unreasonable, unfunded, unfulfilled demands for intelligence, from foundational and operational intelligence to the intelligence that modern weapons need, and to be able to understand newly operationally capable adversaries. So I would just say that this is a time, going back to my successes 2 and 3 data, where you really need to partner with the intelligence community in terms of what your expectations are for data and data use, so that at the exact same time we're acquiring new capability, we are acquiring the intelligence wherewithal to be able to service them and make them be effective. And we could choose any communities and make the same argument. I just happen to choose the 2 that I love the most. I think one of the interesting issues that intelligence is going to have to wrestle with is, interestingly, our lack of clear cyber and space policy. What has happened over the past decade is cyber and space have been the purview of the technical communities as though the capability itself were the determination. Now we're seeing that having policy around use, around deterrence, is going to be really important to understand as we drive to establish the understanding and the wherewithal that we need in order to be effective at protecting, operating in, and deterring in each of those domains. Another thing that intelligence is going to have to wrestle with is competition from other providers of intelligence. And this is another area where I'll just pick on my experience with former President Trump. He did not come into office with a tremendous understanding of the intelligence or national security communities, and he didn't come with the same perspective on US policy either. And those 2 things, combined with the fact that the people he most trusted were not us, and those people he trusted more had information that looked a lot like the stuff that we have. Now, I will tell you, it's not the same. You know, intelligence is never opinion. We have a craft about how you deal with uncertain information with certainty, that there's a hard objectivity to what intelligence is. It tells you what is, not what you prefer it to be. But it does have a lot of arcanity around it. It does have a lot of rules around it. And if it arrives a bit slow, or if it is necessarily guarded in terms of how far it will go, there are a lot of other voices that seem like they are adding in information. And I haven't even talked about just straight open source, what we're going to have to deal with. So this notion of competition from other providers of intelligence, and if we remember that advantage that intelligence provides is as much clarity at anything, that other set of providers can create a real challenge to our clarity. Open source is exploding, and I'm not just talking about social media. I'm talking about the information that is openly available, that is the byproduct of so many other activities, whether that are bills of lading or operational times for any sort of plant in the world. This is a world where there's so much open source available. If the intelligence community sticks to using its curated sources that were exquisitely designed to go after government-held information, it will miss the opportunity to provide clarity and wisdom and insight. And there's a lot of discussion around this issue. Here are a couple things I'd offer. Number one is the thing you hear most often about open source is, how do I trust it? The intelligence community has dealt with that on every single source. You think a human, you trust every human who says anything to you. So it's a little bit disingenuous to say that the problem is open source is that we don't know how to trust it. The second is, it is volumetrically daunting. And so the idea that you won't have tools or expertise in the use of it is probably not a wise way to think about it, as though every analyst can just open up a spigot and all the information they need, and then they'll just sort through it. That just isn't the way it's going to be most effective. I think this is an area where the special ops community has been real leaders in the use of open source intelligence to support their operations, and some real creative uses. But over time, each unit having its own sources and its own schema for what it believes and how it uses, probably not as effective as if the intelligence community kind of leaps into this fray and helps out. Transparency is something that it's going to have to wrestle with, and transparency, both forced and purposeful. The forced transparency is it's really hard to keep a secret now. It's just because the world knows everything, and it is just so connected that pieces of information will become available. And so have to deal with that. And you have to deal with that when you think about speed to use and risk and how you protect it and for how long you protect it. I think those are very technical things that the community is going to have to wrestle with. But there's also a purposeful aspect of transparency, and that is, if the private sector and the citizens are increasingly our national security decision makers, do we have an obligation to share with them the product of the government's efforts in intelligence? And does that look the same as it looks when we provide that to the government that understands what our words possible and confirmed and corroborated all mean? Or are we going to have to develop a new craft around that? But to me, I think increasingly in a world of hyper politicization and hyper polarization, the one voice that still seems to carry some weight is that of the intelligence community. How do you make it so it is a little more broadly available, because the decisions are being made outside of the National Security Council as well? I said that this is a data and a digital world. The intelligence community is certainly going to have to embrace AI. You're not going to be able to get away with it. I get man in the loop, but there will some things, if you insist on human in the loop, you're just not going to do, because the decisions will present themselves too quickly. And so you'll have to decide where you can have that judgment. I think we'll have to build our own ethics around data use, because I don't think data collection and data use, because in general, statute and policy are going to be a little too slow. Trust and truth will be worth us investing in as a community. I'll talk a little bit about R&D. I think we have benefited from the R&D that the private sector has done for us for the past 15 years, and our R&D budgets have gone down. I will tell you that this is a great moment for the US government to double down on its investment in R&D for areas that will need to be addressed in order for us to be assured in information to be able to carry out our mission, which is different than can you trust Netflix's recommendation of your next movie? How we think about risk, how we articulate risk in a technical world, in an information world, it will be its own craft. And it goes back to leaders are going to have to become comfortable technically and comfortable data swimmers. I think learning to make and having the foundation to make decisions faster and to implement capabilities at scale will be the difference between failure and success. Where I think we've gotten awfully good with some of our new experimental capabilities like CIBER and AFWorks and so many of those initiatives, ACWD under Bob Work, that have basically tried to hack the system. I think they have delivered amazing things. My challenge to you, are they delivering outcome at scale? They're doing good things, but are they making a difference? So this notion of decision-making at a scale that will be big enough to make a difference, to have success in this world, I think is still some craft that we're going to have to develop and some leadership work that's going to have to be done. And then the last is our processes are too old, too slow. The humans who operate them seriously, purposefully, absolutely committed to making sure that we do things right. And still, they are not empowered necessarily to reimagine how our processes could be done. So from acquisition to HR to almost any of our processes, we really need to revamp them in a modern way. I know it. I was the director of support at the CIA. We tend not to put our money into support services, but this is a time where if we don't invest in our infrastructure to be faster, surer, more digital, if we don't invest in the leaders and the humans that are running those processes, it won't matter how amazing our capabilities, how great our ability to operate at distance is, we will be hamstrung. So we as leaders, I think, have to be as interested in the processes and our humans that run them as in anything else. So wrapping up my remarks before Q&As, there are some great opportunities out there. I think this moment is a leader's playground in every domain, from the government to the private sector to individuals. This is a moment where that ability to grasp where we are and then know the role you have to play and play it well is a great opportunity. I will say for every leader, and maybe this is something we've seen over the last couple of years, you do have to hold your space and you have to do your job fearlessly. There will be a lot of questions around Afghanistan about whether there were intelligence failures involved. And I have my opinion on it not being an intelligence failure for some reasons. But I will say that everyone has to ask the question, did they do their job as hard as they needed to? Did they speak as clearly about what they knew as well as they needed to? So this moment is one where whatever role you have to play it fearlessly, knowing that good outcome depends on everyone both playing their job hard and then recognizing that the solution is not optimized on any one of those jobs. So great opportunity to be a leader in the moment. I mentioned this before, this is a time where you have to get to the new by releasing the old, but you have to account for the lessons you learned. And I think we're going to have to take risk with the current, not with the future. I've built a lot of programs and a lot of budgets, and the way it usually goes is you do a bottom-up program build. And what you do is all those people explain what they need, and whatever's left over, you try and do the new stuff in that. And because all you're doing is building capabilities, you just stretch that new out over time. Yeah, we don't have that opportunity anymore. What we're going to have to do is take more risk with the current in order to get to the future capabilities we know we need faster. And that is a leadership moment. Within the intelligence community, I think this is a really exciting time with new development of new analytic tradecraft that combines technical and geopolitical rather than those two things being separate. New human tradecraft, how are you operating in a world where you must be who you are? How do you operate expeditionarily when you don't have the huge support you had before? How do you do over the horizon things? How do you develop new collectors? Right? Most of the collectors we have were imagined 70 years ago, and we have been extraordinary at finding new uses for them. Some of the new security threats are going to require new collectors, and how do you think about that? We've done it before, we can do it again. I think my last two issues will be operating securely from where you are. Time to figure that out. I know there's risk associated with it, but the risk and time involved with having to go into a secure facility in order to go forward is past. The pandemic taught us that. Private sector was able to figure out how to operate while the security community really struggled to be able to get themselves back online. So let's get on with finding the great solutions to operating securely from where you are. And I think we need a new approach to getting the talent we've always had. The national security community, in my experience, has the best talent, and talent wants to come, but talent is the what it looks like is different, the demands of it are different, and the careers we're going to offer them are going to be different. So we've got to figure out how we construct careers that imagine people moving, that allow them to have their security clearance with them and move in and out without everything having to be a new start for them. So that's it. I'll give you a few minutes to ask questions. I was going to give you fewer minutes so that you didn't ask anything hard. I will say that I think this moment can feel daunting. And I suppose without leadership, it might be, but I think it's exciting. I'm going to leave you with a couple quotations. I don't know, it's just the way I roll. My favorite one right now is by a teacher named R.N. Nost, and she says, "Do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break, and all can be mended, not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, a broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you." And then Longfellow the poet said, "Let us be up and doing with a heart for any fate." I am honored beyond measure to have the chance to talk to you. And you need to know that even though I'm a steely-eyed former intelligence professional, I am indebted to each of you for what you have done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gordon, for that excellent address. You did a fantastic job transitioning us from a reflection of the past to our look towards the future tomorrow. So thank you for your service, and thank you for that fantastic address.